Ladies and gentlemen, today it's really a big pleasure because I have Zhecho Dobrev together with me. Hi, Zhecho, how are you?
Hi, Grigore. Thank you. I'm very good. I'm very happy to be with you, and as a football fan, I'm super excited.
Thank you very much. And we are going to discuss about the big miss. We will explain what is exactly it, but you wrote an outstanding book, and I think it's really important to share that. For the people watching the video, Zhecho showed the book, and for the others listening to the podcast, you will find all the information related to this book in the show notes. And it's really worth it to buy it, but I think let's deep dive into the topic, and then you can really evaluate if it makes sense. I am sure it's worth it. Before we start discussing about the book, Zhecho, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. So I've really dedicated my almost whole professional career to customer experience. I started in 2009, first as analyst and then consultant, senior consultant, principal consultant, and so on, with a company called Beyond Philosophy, which is one of the first solely dedicated to customer experience consultancies. And yeah, 13 years down the road, there have been a lot of projects, a lot of programs, and then I thought now it's a good time to write everything in a book.
I think that totally makes sense. Thank you very much for sharing that, and also for transparency reason. Colin Show was on my episode 100, and now it's time to discuss about the book. And I really like to have this continuously connection with different companies, seeing the different views also coming from the same company. Perhaps before we start discussing about your book, which values drive you in life?
Well, I found an interesting part, an interesting piece in a book. I think it was by Dan and Chip Heath, called "Defining Moments," and they talk about research from Professor Harry Rees, who was looking at the different literature for personal relationships, and there was something very interesting there. So and he was looking for this, like, well, what makes some personal relationship with your loved ones endure while others fail? And he called the thing perceived partner responsiveness. So essentially it comes down to this: do we perceive that our partner, our loved ones, are responsive to us? And responsiveness was coming down to three things: understanding, so understanding our beliefs, values, and so on. Understanding, hold on, I had them. Validation, so kind of like being, showing that we really care for this person. The last one was caring, and I think those are, when I did my research for the book, and I guess we'll talk about that, we found very much the same things are the drivers of customer experience. So essentially, what makes our personal relationships endure are the same things, pretty much the same things that make customer relationships endure. So I think those universal things, being responsive to our partner, showing that we understand them, and that we care for them, these are some universal truths.
Thank you, and I think that's totally makes sense. And basically, perhaps also to introduce the book, The Big Miss: Our Organization Overlook the Value of Emotions. Where does the idea of writing such a book come from?
Well, that's funny, actually. So when the pandemic hit, I was literally staying outside on the porch. And we're consultants, so all our projects were briefly stopped until the organizations figure out how to work remotely and things like that, the important stuff. And then I was sitting out and thinking, and as you mentioned, Colin's been on your show. He always told that we're sitting on this gold mine, that we, over these 13 years that I've been in the company, and before that, we've gathered this large database where we have data about the aspects of the experience, data about customer emotions, and data about customer attitudes and behavior towards organization, like likelihood to recommend, likelihood to purchase again, and things like that. And and we always thought how to analyze it, but it was like so big that we never could get our heads around how to go about that. And then when COVID hit and I was sitting outside, one thing I was thinking is like, I think that organizations, everyone pretty much does journey mapping, but I think most people are doing journey mapping a little bit wrong, or they're missing a big trick. You see, like most organizations, I thought like looking, and we've done this journey mapping with lots of organizations. We've been doing pretty much like this. So we have the purchasing experience and the servicing experience. So the infinity life cycle. So you start with the brand, then awareness, purchasing experience, getting on board, using the product or service, billing and payment. You get some communications, emails from organizations. You call their contact center or customer support, and things like that. And so most organizations, I think, and again, we've been doing this, are focusing on like, what is the customer doing? Like first step, second step, third step, And so I thought, well, I think we have data for about aspects that fit in all those journey touch point categories. So which of those journey touch point categories is actually the most important? And how do customer relationships fare against those things? You see, because I think one of the tricks that people are missing is like they're focusing on what the customer is doing and not like, well, let's look at this journey and what can we do in the different moments to create this feeling of a relationship? Because I felt that most organizations are overlooking at this. For example, one example, I was talking with customers of a bank, and a customer said, oh, I've been with this bank for 12 years. How could I go to this other bank and ask for loan there? And I say, oh, well, that's interesting. You know, this customer is feeling a relationship, but how does the bank show any kind of that they feel this sort of relationship with this customer? So that was one of the part of my thinking at the beginning. So then I did the research and said to Colin, well, let's do a white paper. And he said, well, you've written so much, why don't you write a book? And then we wrote a book.
I think that was a great idea from Colin, writing a book, because research paper, it's a good, but not a lot of people would read that. And now it's your book, it's out for everybody to read that. And why did you decided to write about emotions?
Yes. Well, because again, the research showed that actually emotions. So I told you that first I was thinking about relationships. And we had this touch point about customer relationship that included some emotions like feeling cared for as a person. This organization is trustworthy, responsive, respects me, and other things. And we had a traditional touch points. And what we found is that actually this this emotional attachment, as we call it, the feeling of relationship and those other emotional aspects, is the biggest driver of value compared to the traditional touch points like product brand, advertising, communications, customer service, and so on. And again, this confirmed something that we have found with lots of other organizations. But the reason I wrote about emotion, I call it the big miss, is because organizations, by and large, they don't focus on the emotions. They don't do research on emotions. They don't have a strategy around emotions. By and large, they don't train people how to evoke specific emotions. And in my 13 years as a consultant, there's been pretty much only like one organization that we walked in and they showed us their research and say, we found that these are the key emotions in our experience and we are measuring those. There was one or two other organizations that are measuring something like customer relationships, some interesting ways to measure customer relationships, and so on. But like of all these organizations, there's been like one or two organizations that haven't worked with us that is measuring emotion. And that's why I think it's a big miss, because it's the biggest driver of value, and yet people don't have a strategy and don't know how to really approach that as a as a science and a strategy.
What you said earlier is you evaluated a lot of data that you have created throughout the years at Beyond Philosophy. And if I understand well, you have an approach or a discipline that you define the emotional signature. What is this? What is exactly?
Sure. Well, so basically, this is our customer research tool, quantitative, that we find what really drives value. So the difference between, and we can distinguish between what people say they want and what actually drives value. And some of the unique things there is like, we take emotions into account. And again, our research shows if you don't take emotions into account, for one thing, you don't get the real picture of the real world, because we know customers have emotions. And two, essentially, you're missing like 50% of the picture. So you are allocating resources to things that may be not as important value drivers. And then the second thing is we can find there's, like we say, a big difference between what people say they want and what actually drives value. So let me give you some examples. We did research with patients of in Houston, actually, with the hospital system there. And patient would say, we want to spend more time with the doctor. Okay. Now, if you're the customer experience manager, you go to the CFO and say, hey, Mr. Finance guy, we need to employ more doctors or increase the time people spend with the doctor. You probably lose your job either on that same meeting or a few months later, because actually that doesn't increase customer satisfaction at all. What we found is people don't want more mean time with the doctor, but more quality time. So instead of the doctor spending the time, filling sheets on the computer and things like that, they want to feel listen to them, acknowledge their concerns, show that they try to get to know to them as person, staff anticipate their needs, respect them, respect their time, things like that. So it was about the quality of the time, not more time. Similar things with customers of large, worldwide, famous charge card, particularly with the premium customers. They would say, we want this card to be more accepted. Okay, it makes sense, because if the card is not accepted in stores, it's not very useful, is it? But what we found is those people have been their customer for 20, 25 years. I literally interviewed people. And every now they would say, oh, but we don't want them to book us in a nice restaurant. We want them to tell us which are the trendy restaurants in Barcelona and book us a table in the balcony or with a good view, blah, blah, blah. So reading between the lines, and our research showed that essentially it's the feeling of prestige that drives the most value. But people don't say we want prestige. People say something about the product. Similarly, insurance customers, telecom customers would say the most important thing is the network, because without the network, your phone is not very useful. But again, people say we want product, but actually oftentimes they are not really aware of the real drivers to their attitudes and behaviors towards the brand. And like you asked about emotional signature, with that we can find those emotional and subconscious drivers of their attitudes and behavior towards organizations.
I think you are touching my emotions, because you shared two examples, one about an hospital. I am working in an hospital, and therefore I really understand what you are saying, and that's what we are also trying to explain. And you mentioned charge card, that's American Express. It's quite clear, because I was working for a joint venture of American Express, and therefore I really understand that the feeling of being member of American Express, the link to this brand, it's extremely important for customer. And what you shared, it was really also feedback that we got from customer directly, that they didn't want to give back the card because of this member since. And yes. One guy moved from a corporate card into an individual card, and he wanted also to have the member since that he had on the corporate card. It was not possible, and for he was really struggling. And there were a lot of negative emotions involved until we found a solution for him. And therefore it totally makes sense, and I can understand that.
Yeah, we see this member since I always thought, like, the first time I saw that, I felt how powerful it is. It's so simple, but this is about the relationship. For people, it's the proof of that relationship, and they want to be recognized for that relationship. So it's really a question of other organizations, how they can find a way to replicate this. Let me actually give you an example. Nowadays everyone is moving digital transformation and stuff like that. So just like last year, we were working with a company in Canada, B2B, but also B2C company, and with energy. And before, commercial customers used to order through the local office, okay? But then they moved those ordering to a 1-800 central number. And I was reading the comments of our survey, and like one customer literally said, it's not that that guy is a bad receptionist. He just doesn't know our area. Like, we have to repeatedly give instructions to the drivers. But that made me think. And so people were like really unhappy with this. But it made me realize that what they had done is also take away that feeling of a relationship. So before, you can imagine you are this owner, and you go to order heating oil, and you go to the office, you know the office guys, you chit chat, they know you, you have all this relationship, and now they've taken all that relationship away. You're calling a 1-800 number and no one knows you. No one knows anything, even how to send the instructions for rural, for the drivers of these trucks to go to some rural area in Canada. And suddenly this whole relationship is gone. So and so I think essentially it's like organizations have to think now, how can we use technology to create this feeling of a relationship?
Thank you very much. I think what you're saying, it totally makes sense. And you're sharing a lot of great example, and I'm sure the audience will appreciate that. But basically what you shared at the beginning, it's few companies are doing that in the right way. You said only one that you saw in your career. Where should companies start if they need to care about emotions?
Sure, that's a good question. So I think the first thing they need to realize is to start to do research that gets to those unconscious drivers of behavior, because most of our behavior is driven by our unconscious, and emotions are typically functioning around there. So try to find the real drivers of customer behavior, taking emotions into account. So that's one thing. Second, it's a very simple question, but what is the experience you want to deliver to customers, and how do you want your customers to feel? Now, defining what emotions you want customers to feel, and ideally that will be based on research, because what emotions make people buy, or what emotions are important at the purchasing experience versus at the retention or renewing experience. So defining those and then thinking, well, what can we do to evoke those on a consistent basis is very important. And then when you do that, then that takes you to the culture part, which is very important. For if you don't want this to be driven by one or two people in the organization, you need the back office people and the front office to be working towards the same vision. So if you have defined the experience and define how you want customers to feel, then you can communicate and equip people with sort of the vision and the skills to think about, well, in their roles, how are they affecting customer experience, and how are they working towards this same vision that you want to go towards customers feeling. So I think those are some practical things.
And I think it's really interesting, but basically most of the companies are doing surveys that are not related to emotion. Does it mean do they need to restructure their surveys, or what's your approach?
Yeah, well, yeah, same thing. So we just recently were talking to some people, and we mentioned about emotions, and we said, well, do you measure emotion? And they said yes. So I was a little bit surprised. Like I said, there's only like a few companies. So I said, well, so you're telling me that you're measuring, and you have data on to what extent people feel trust towards you, cared for, value towards you. Oh no, not that kind of data. So I think maybe they say they do NPS or something, but like, okay, you do NPS, fine, good, but like, what are the drivers of NPS? And again, oftentimes those, like we say, are emotional aspects. So do you know whether feeling appreciated or respected or listened to or understands, and like what creates those emotions? So which aspects of your experience drive those emotions that in turn positive emotions affect value and negative emotions destroy value? So And again, you don't need to do this every day, but you can. And interestingly, nowadays with machine learning and the developments in natural language processing, you can get voice of the customer data as long as it's like it really comes from the customer, and you can find the emotional sentiment of what people are saying, and then when you combine this with operational data, you can find which operational instances create these emotions, and then you can get a predictive score, not just on the customers who have taken the survey, but on every customer. Because if you see like, oh, people have spoken to George and they have had this problem resolution experience, or they have had this, or they've walked into the branch 3 times, and and then we can say, well, who else have done that same thing? And then you can essentially have a best guess on what are they likely to feel. And now if you know that, now you can take some strategies. Now, what can we do a nurturing campaign to save some customers, and the ones that we see are happy, what can we do to upsell and further develop that relationship with those customers? So we're now living in this new world where you can do a lot with data, as long as you know you have the right data that really captures the real drivers of customer behavior.
Thank you. And I think to make it a bit more tangible also for the audience, what should business do from a strategical point of view?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think from a strategical point, I've already mentioned something. So like first find the real drivers of customer behavior, define the experience you want to deliver, and equip the organization, the people with the skills to do that, and to drive that vision for the experience, affect the customer experience. In my book, I talk about 7 strategic principles to improve your aim, but I'll just mention these 3 things are, I think, good enough for now.
But I think it's really interesting. You're mentioning these 7 business practices for emotional connection.
Yes.
And I need to ask that you need to choose now between your children. Which one do you prefer?
On those 7 things, I think so culture is very important, yeah, culture is very important, but I think it needs to start with this better understanding of the real drivers of customer behavior. So I think if you know that, then a lot of things can happen on the back of that.
And based on your research, which were the most remarkable example that you had throughout your research? Because you did a lot of research to create this book. Which one stand out from your point of view?
Sure. Well, I think one of the best cases was from Maersk Line, the largest container shipping company. So they did a complete program, and they did it in a very good way. So they have a lot of, and the best thing there, they have a lot of smart people, Six Sigma, doing logistics all the time, and they calculated that for every 4-point improvement in NPS, they are getting 1% more cargo shipped, and their NPS increased by 40 percentage points over 30 months. And again, we had done this research with them, and they found that actually the biggest driver of value for them was ease of problem resolution. Not so emotion, but actually that was creating and driving a lot of positive or negative emotions. And they completely redesigned that ease of problem resolution, so that where is that sitting, who is accountable, and they invested a lot into that. Then they also defined the experience that they want to deliver. They said, it's interesting, they ship containers, not even people, but they say we want to stand for trust, cared for, valued, and that had some implications for the way they do business. Because they recognize that they have this brand and they can charge premium prices, but with premium prices, you need to have a premium experience. And so they focus on these 3 emotions to make the transition between being transactional and focus on the transaction to actually focusing on the customer relationship and drive more value. So that was that was a very good example. And we did some podcasts we've done some webinars with the guy who was leading the program, the vice president, and a lady called Michelle Patterson, who was actually the customer experience leader in charge. So that was, I think that was a very successful program that a lot of people can learn.
Thank you very much. And now we are coming to the end of this discussion. However, still some questions. Colin Shaw is always speaking about artificial intelligence, data, and customer behavior or behavioral science in order to create this customer science. And now
Yes.
with these emotions, we are creating and getting new data. What's your view? What will come out from this customer science?
Yes, well, this is really, for me, I share that opinion. The future to the key to future competitiveness. So nowadays, yes, we have data, but you need to think, well, what data would really first, like, what problems are we going to solve with data, and how could we use data to improve the customer experience, nurture relationship, improve our sales ratio, and improve our retention ratio, and so on. And without data, you need data about the real drivers of customer behavior, right? So you have data. And they say data is gold of the new economy, or the engine, as long as you can analyze it. So that's where AI and machine learning comes. But again, I emphasize that you can create these algorithms, but unless you take emotions into account, well, and actually there's some research that algorithms with and without emotions, those with emotions outperform significantly the others. So this is where the algorithms comes. And then, okay, now you know some of the things about customer. Well, what do you do about the design of that experience? And this is where behavior science could come in. Knowing the science about essentially customer behavior, you can design the experience, you can design certain nudges, you can frame things a certain way. And an interesting company that is kind of doing some of those things, I found when I was doing the research for my book, is a company called Simand, a Canadian startup. And essentially they find customers. So they work, they're B2B, so they work, let's say, with banks, with telecoms, and so on. And they find customers that have high probability of defecting on their bills, loans, and so on. And they also found that, well, actually, if a customer defect on a loan, it's typically not just one loan, but they have a car loan, a mortgage, a credit card, something. And what most organizations used to do is like defer payments, but that is essentially like kicking the can down the road, and the customer is thinking, oh, my problem is gone, but actually it just gets bigger. So what this organization is doing is like creating and understanding the profile of who is likely to defect before they do, and start to implement some communications and self-service, and using nudges to nudge the customer behavior, to change their behavior a little bit, to change the plans of how they are making payments before they have defected. And then they're using AI and natural language processing to see how the customer is responding to those nudges, to see the sentiment of what they say, how they say, and then further adapt their approach. And all this is doing through self-service, so alleviating things from the customer service staff and the call center. And you can see it's a better experience. It helps retention. It helps save costs. So I think that is the future. More organizations should be thinking what can they do with data, and how they can use it to create a better experience, and being more proactive.
Thank you very much. And I think you're speaking about the future, and the future is now. We are now in 10 years time from now. 2033, and we are discussing about customer experience. What we are discussing about?
Sure. Well, I think what we just described, we're discussing, I think really this intersection of AI and behavior science and data, Yeah, I really think so. So if you think about, I think like 10, 15 years ago, all the big organizations started to create these customer experience programs we've worked with. Now they have internal people with actually a lot of people working on that customer experience and so on. But we still get some of those on the tail end, smaller companies coming and so on. Now the big organizations focus on creating these data lakes and starting to experiment more with machine learning and AI. I have to say that most of them focus on automation and stuff like that. But I think still in 10 years' time, there will be a lot more stories and a lot more sort of success of what works, what doesn't work. I think if you think like, well, CRM, where CRM came in and, the world didn't turn pink overnight and many projects fail. Then same with customer experience programs, with digital transformation. So I think it first needs to start with understanding of what are we really trying to do and understanding what really drives customer behavior and how to design those things using science. Because again, in 10 years' time, many of these machine learning projects and AI would have gone wrong, don't deliver any returns. But this is where you need to have the right knowledge and tool and vision to drive a success of that.
Thank you very much, Zhecho. We discussed about the big miss. Our organization overlooked the value of emotions, and now we are really coming to the end of the game. In the last 3 minutes of this game, 3 questions for you. The first one, is there a book that helped you during your career or during your life that you would like to suggest to the audience?
Yeah, well, actually, I think you need to read a lot of books, but the last one that kind of like stood out for me, I was reading it with a lot of interest and almost like feel sorry that it finished, was this The Defining Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. I love the examples there a lot. So that's definitely one.
Thank you very much. And what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, well, people can find me on LinkedIn, also Twitter, at Beyond Philosophy's website. Yeah, LinkedIn would be a good place to start.
And where we can find your book?
All big, particularly online retailers. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, yeah, some of those big
Thank you
retailers.
very much. And the last question is, Zhecho, golden nugget, it's something that we discussed or something new that you would leave to the audience?
Sure. Well, maybe I already told you about the key to our own relationship with our loved ones. So then maybe I'll finish with a Ogilvy quote. I think it's very relevant. They say customers don't think how they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say. So I think if you have that in mind in business and not take everything for granted from what customers say, I think there's a lot of things you can do and achieve success.
Thank you very much. And we conclude here the discussion. It was a great pleasure. To the audience, stop this podcast, post this podcast, go buy Zhecho's book, because it's really a great book, a lot of insights. It's the other half of the cake that people are not often relating to. It's all about emotions. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. We love feedback. Therefore, feel free to contact Zhecho or myself and to have a nice discussion, to continue the discussion. Thank you, Zhecho.
Sure. Thank you, Gregorio.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share the word of mouth, subscribe it, share it. Until the next episode, please don't forget, we are not in a B2B or B2C business, we are in a human-to-human environment. Thank you!